Somewhere between season 4 and season 5 of Suits, a very specific thing starts happening to people who have been watching from the beginning. They start to feel like they have seen this episode before. Not this plot, this episode. Same beats, same fights, same firm in danger, same name coming off the wall, same person finding out the same secret, same magic line in the same hallway. The faces are different, the shape is the same. And most fans, when they feel this, chalk it up to the show simply running out of ideas. That is the wrong answer. Suits did not run out of ideas. Suits was built, from its very first episode, to run on a small handful of the same ideas forever. Tonight, across the next few hours, I want to walk you through exactly how that happened, why it happened, and the one strange reason it ended up making the show bigger, years later, than anyone who made it ever imagined. Section 1. The Blue Sky Blueprint. How USA Network pre-built the repetition. Before Aaron Korsh wrote a single scene of Suits, the show he was going to make had already been designed for him. Not the plot, not the characters, the shape, the feel, the rules about what could and could not happen in any given episode. All of that was locked in by the network before the pilot was even pitched. And once you understand what those rules were, the rest of the show makes a lot more sense. The repetition people complain about in the later seasons was not a mistake that crept in somewhere around season 5. It was the plan from the beginning. It just took a few years to show its face. In April of 2011, 2 months before Suits premiered, the Wall Street Journal ran a profile of USA Network. At the time, USA was the most watched cable channel in America, and had been for years. It was dominating. The network's boss, Bonnie Hammer, gave the reporter a single sentence that summed up what kind of show USA would say yes to. She used 5 words: aspirational, blue skies, upbeat, optimistic, character-driven. If your show did not fit those 5 words, USA was not going to buy it. If your show did fit those 5 words, you had a very good chance. Korsh fit those 5 words, so Suits got made. This approach had a name inside the industry. People called it the Blue Sky Formula. The idea behind it was simple. Most cable channels in the 2000s were chasing prestige. They wanted the next Sopranos. They wanted dark, serious, slow-burning drama with morally gray men doing morally gray things in dimly lit rooms. USA decided to go the other way. Sunshine, good-looking people, witty banter. New York and Los Angeles and Miami shot in a way that looked like a vacation you wanted to go on. Problems that got solved by the end of the hour. A clever main character with one unusual skill or trait. A warm ensemble of friends around them. Nothing too heavy. Nothing that would make you feel bad after you watched it. The shows that followed this formula were a long list. Monk, about a detective with obsessive tendencies. Psych, about a fake psychic who was really just observant. Burn Notice, about a spy who had been kicked out of the agency. Royal Pains, about a doctor in the Hamptons. White Collar, about a charming con man working for the FBI. Covert Affairs, about a young CIA agent. Fairly Legal, Necessary Roughness, Graceland. These shows had different plots, different settings, different stars, but you could feel the family resemblance between all of them within 5 minutes. Same music sense, same pace, same kind of ending where the good guys got the win and the world stayed warm. Suits was the newest member of that family. It was the legal version of the same show. Mike Ross had the clever trick, which was his memory. Harvey Specter was the mentor. The firm was the warm ensemble. The cases got solved in an hour. The city of New York got shot like a travel ad. Everyone wore beautiful clothes. And at the end of every episode, even when things went wrong, nobody was permanently worse off than they were at the start. Here is the part that matters for understanding why the show got repetitive. In that same Wall Street Journal piece, another producer working on a USA show at the time was asked about the formula. His name was John Turteltaub, and he was making a show called Common Law for the network. He said something very telling. He said that when you have a brand this strong, the danger is that every show starts to become the same show. He was warning them. He was saying, you have built a machine that makes one kind of thing really well, but it only makes one kind of thing. If you keep feeding it, it keeps giving you the same output. A little dressed up, a little different on the outside, but the same shape underneath. He was right. And Suits is probably the clearest example of what he was warning about. Because Suits ran for 9 seasons, which is a very long time for a show to try to stay inside such a narrow set of rules. The rules of blue sky programming sound simple, but they are actually heavy when you think about them as a writer trying to come up with stories for year 7 of a show. Every episode has to end in a way that protects the warmth of the main group. That means the characters cannot really change in big, permanent ways because big, permanent change disturbs the warmth. It means you cannot kill off a main character most of the time because death is not blue sky. It means you cannot have your hero do something so bad that the audience does not want to spend time with him anymore. It means that no matter what fight just happened, by the end of the run of episodes, the main group has to be back together again, cracking jokes in the office. Now think about what that does to your story options. If you cannot permanently change anyone, then every big conflict has to eventually get reset. Every time a character quits the firm in anger, they have to come back. Every time 2 characters stop speaking to each other, they have to patch it up. Every time somebody gets fired, somebody rehires them. Every time a new rival shows up to destroy the firm has to survive. And every season needs new stakes, new fights, new rivals, new fires to put out, because the show has to keep moving. But none of those fights can actually land a permanent blow, because that would break the warmth. If you are a writer in that situation, you are forced into one of 2 options. You can come up with a new kind of conflict every time, one that feels different from all the others, which is extremely hard to do for 9 years. Or, you can take the same handful of conflicts and run them again with different names, different angles, different faces on the rivals. Most writers, most of the time, end up doing the second thing. Not because they are lazy, but because the math of a long-running network show almost forces them to. There is another piece of the story that makes this even clearer. When Aaron Korsh originally came up with the idea that eventually became Suits, it was not a legal show at all. It was going to be a half-hour comedy. The main character was going to be a guy with a great memory who worked at a Wall Street bank, faking his way through finance instead of law. Korsh has said this in interviews many times. The show that made it on the air, the one we all know, was heavily shaped by the network during development. USA took the idea and moved it into the world of a law firm because legal dramas worked for them. They even suggested the title. The word Suits is a double meaning, referring to both lawsuits and the clothes lawyers wear. And that clean, marketable title came out of conversations with the network executives, not out of Korsh's original pitch. So even the name of the show was a network decision. Even the setting was a network decision. Even the length was a network decision, since Korsh had imagined something shorter and funnier. By the time the pilot was actually being filmed, the show had been reshaped at almost every level to fit the blue sky machine that USA had already built. And then, there is the case of the week problem. Korsh has spoken about this openly, including to Fandom Wire in 2024. From the very first season, the network was pushing him to write every episode around a new client. A new person would walk into the firm, have a problem, and Harvey and Mike would solve it by the end of the hour. The network wanted the client to be what they called the puppy, which was their in-house slang for the thing the audience was supposed to root for in any given episode. Korsh did not agree. He thought the real heart of the show was the relationship between Mike and Harvey, not whoever walked through the door that week. So he did something sneaky. He let the network shoot the client of the week scenes. Then, he quietly cut a lot of them out in the edit. Nobody from the network ever asked him to put them back. That fight, between the network wanting a client of the week and Korsh wanting a deeper character story, tells you exactly what Suits was being pulled between. On one side, the Blue Sky Machine wanted the safe, resettable, procedural version of the show. On the other side, Korsh wanted something more layered. What the audience ended up with was a show that was always partly one and partly the other, never fully committing to either. And that middle ground is actually one of the reasons the show became so repetitive. It tried to have both. It tried to have real, ongoing stories about characters and their feelings, while also resetting the firm and the cases every few weeks to keep the warmth in place. Those two goals pull in opposite directions. Over 9 seasons, the show solved that pull by using the same stories over and over, because those were the stories that were already proven to work inside the Blue Sky rules. You can see this most clearly in the types of problems the show keeps going back to. Someone threatens the firm. The main group fights back and saves the firm. Someone important leaves the firm. The main group grieves and then brings in someone new to fill the gap. 2 characters fall out. 2 characters make up. A rival from the past returns. A rival from the past is defeated again, over and over with different trim. This is not a sign that the writers had no ideas. It is a sign that the show was built with a small set of allowed shapes, and every story had to fit one of those shapes to make it to air. It helps to compare Suits with what was happening on other networks at the same time. On HBO, Game of Thrones was killing main characters by the busload. On AMC, Breaking Bad was turning its hero into a villain on purpose, slowly and permanently. On FX, shows like The Americans were letting their main characters drift into places they could never come back from. Those shows could do those things because their networks wanted that. Their rules were different. A dark, permanent change was a feature, not a problem. Suits never had that option. The network that paid for Suits did not want dark, permanent changes. The network that paid for Suits wanted someone to watch the show with a glass of wine after a long day at work and feel better at the end of it. That is a completely different brief. And a show built under that brief is a show that has to keep finding new ways to dress up the same safe outcomes. Even the look of the show was part of this blueprint. The Ringer ran a piece in 2016 that pointed out how Suits used what they called the blue sky visual language. Big open windows, sunlight bouncing off glass, skylines, clean, bright office interiors. No shadows where shadows would be expected. The wardrobe designer, Jolie Andriotta, built outfits that looked aspirational, especially for Jessica Pearson, whose clothes were written about like they were their own character. The whole feel of the show was designed to make you want to live inside it. That is hard to do if the stories inside it are breaking apart and rebuilding in a way that feels messy. So the stories had to stay clean, which meant they had to stay safe, which meant they had to stay similar. When you put all of this together, the picture is clear. Suits was not a show that accidentally got stuck in its ways. Suits was a show that was ordered, in advance, to stay in a specific lane. The lane had walls on both sides. Bright tone on one side, warm ensemble on the other. No permanent damage in between. Inside that lane, the writers had to come up with 9 seasons of stories. They did what any group of talented writers in that position would do. They found a handful of story shapes that worked inside the walls of the lane, and they ran those shapes again and again with different coats of paint. That is the blueprint. That is why the repetitions started so early and lasted so long. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the blueprint alone does not tell the whole story. The rules of the network were one thing. What the show did inside those rules was its own choice. And the single biggest choice Suits made, the one that would shape every season after the first, was the nature of the secret at the center of the whole thing. A secret that, once you really think about it, was never actually designed to be kept or to be broken. It was designed to hang there, right on the edge of being found out, for as long as the show needed it to. And that single design choice is the next piece of the puzzle. Section 2. The unresolvable premise. Mike's secret as a perpetual motion machine. Every show that runs for a long time has to ask itself a very hard question at some point. What is the engine of this story? What is the thing that keeps the tension alive week after week, season after season, and gives us a reason to care about these people? Some shows answer that question with a mystery. Who killed her? Who is watching them? What is in the box? Other shows answer it with a relationship. Will they ever get together? Will they ever break up? Will these two friends stop fighting? And a third kind of show, the kind Suits is, answers the question with a secret. A secret that 1 or 2 people know, that the rest of the world does not, and that would ruin everything if it ever got out. Suits built itself around one of those secrets. Mike Ross never went to law school. Mike Ross never got a law degree. Mike Ross was never actually a lawyer. He just had an unusually sharp memory and a mentor who decided, in a split second inside a hotel room, to hire him anyway. From that moment forward, the whole show was running on the promise that one day, somehow, someone was going to find out, and everything was going to fall apart. The problem is that this kind of promise is a trap for the writers, because if the secret really does come out, the show ends. Mike goes to jail, or gets run out of the profession, or flees the country, and the whole thing falls over. But if the secret never comes out, the show feels fake. The audience starts to notice that nothing is actually happening, that the danger is only pretend, and they start to lose interest. So the writers have to sit in this impossible spot. They have to keep the secret alive, keep the danger feeling real, and at the same time, never actually let the secret go off. At least not until they are ready to end the show. What Suits does to survive this trap is fascinating, and once you see the trick, you cannot unsee it. The show keeps the secret alive by letting a new person find out about it every single season. Not the world, not the authorities, not the bar association. Just one more person. Someone close enough to the main group to create a new crisis, but someone who can be quietly folded into the circle of trust, or scared into silence, or turned into a reluctant friend before the episode is over. The secret gets refreshed. The danger feels new. But the actual risk to the show, the actual threat of Mike losing everything, never really moves forward. There is a number that tells this story better than anything else. Over the full run of Suits, at least 14 characters find out the truth about Mike. 14. One after another. Sometimes more than one in a single season. The list reads like a roll call of the show itself. Harvey Specter, who knows from the first episode, because he is the one who hires him. Donna Paulson, who figures it out almost immediately, because Donna figures out everything. Trevor, Mike's oldest friend, who knew all along. Jessica Pearson, the boss of the firm, who finds out at the end of the first season when Trevor tells her in a moment of anger. Rachel Zane, who finds out in season 3 after a long tease. Louis Litt, who finds out in season 4 and uses it as a weapon. Katrina Bennett, who notices. Scotty, a love interest of Harvey's who gets told as part of a dying relationship. Professor Henry Gerard, a Harvard ethics professor who realizes Mike could not have been in his class. Clifford Danner, a man Harvey once prosecuted. Jonathan Sidwell, a banker Mike briefly worked for. Sheila Saz, Lewis's on and off partner who worked at Harvard and helped with records. Robert Zane, Rachel's father, who eventually has to be told. And several more in the later seasons. Each of these reveals is handled almost the same way. A character notices a detail that does not add up. A transcript that is missing. A class Mike says he took where he was not. A memory that does not match the record. The show spends a few episodes building dread around it. The viewer is told, through music and looks and tense pauses, that this time the secret is really going to come out. Then, at the last moment, the person who found out is pulled into the group. Maybe they get something they wanted. Maybe they feel sympathy for Mike. Maybe Harvey promises them a favor. Maybe they are just tired of fighting. Whatever the reason, the door closes. The secret is safe again. The firm goes back to work. And a season or so later, the whole cycle starts again, with someone new. You could almost draw it on a chart. A steady line running along for a while. A sudden spike of tension. A near crash. A quick recovery. A few calm episodes. And then another spike with a different face behind it. Over and over. The shape of the line is almost the same every time, just with different labels. Aaron Korsh, the creator, actually talked about this pattern in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter in 2016. He was asked to look back at how the secret had been used, and he more or less admitted it. He said that for 5 seasons, the show had been running on random people finding out about Mike, using it for their own reasons, or agreeing to keep the secret because they felt sorry for him. 5 seasons. 5. That is more than half the life of the show, built on the same single idea, recycled again and again with small changes. When the creator of the show himself says something like that, it is hard to argue that the repetition was accidental. Now, some of these reveals do carry real weight. The Jessica reveal at the end of season 1 matters, because it forces Harvey to blackmail his own boss to keep Mike around, which tells us something about who Harvey really is. The Louis reveal in season 4 matters, because Louis uses it to become name partner, which changes the structure of the firm. The Sheila Saz reveal in season 5 matters, because it is the one that finally blows everything up. But the problem is not that some of the reveals are meaningful. The problem is that there are too many of them, stacked too close together, and most of them end with a reset instead of a real consequence. Think about what that does to the viewer. The first time the secret is almost found out, you are on the edge of your seat. The second time, you are still on the edge of your seat, but maybe a little less so. By the 5th or 6th time, a part of your brain has started to notice the pattern. You stop believing that the secret will actually blow up, because it has not blown up yet, and the show has taught you that the tension is going to get walked back. You still watch. You still enjoy the moment-to-moment stuff. But the main engine of the show, the thing that was supposed to be terrifying, has gone soft. The threat has become background noise. There is one detail in all of this that makes the repetition even clearer, and it is something the show never really deals with. Mike Ross grew up being raised by his grandmother, Edith. Edith knew Mike. She knew his whole life. She knew that he had been kicked out of school and never finished his degree. That is shown on the show. We see it. So if Mike is suddenly working as a lawyer at one of the biggest firms in New York, a real grandmother would have questions. Any grandmother would. And the show never answers those questions. Edith visits the firm. Edith meets his co-workers. Edith dies in season 2, and the show never gives us one scene where she actually confronts Mike about what he is really doing with his life. A single conversation would have solved it, one way or the other. Either she knew and chose not to say anything, or she did not, and then we have to ask how that is possible. The show picks neither option. It just lets the question hang and hopes we do not notice. Screen Rant wrote about this exact plot hole in 2024, long after the show ended, and pointed out how easy it would have been to fix. One line of dialogue would have done it. But the writers did not want to use that line, because once you commit to the idea that Mike's grandmother knew, the story gets more complicated. And once you commit to the idea that she did not know, you have to explain why. Either answer forces the show to deal with the secret in a grown-up way. The show was not interested in a grown-up way. The show was interested in keeping the secret available as a plot tool. Leaving Edith's knowledge vague kept the tool sharp. That is what all of this adds up to. The secret was not really a secret. It was a tool. It was a lever the writers could pull any time they needed a new burst of tension for a new arc. Find a new person to have it. Give them a reason to care. Build a few episodes of dread. Resolve it. Refill the tank. Repeat. And when the secret finally did come out, halfway through season 5, the show handled it in a way that actually proves the point. Mike got arrested. The whole firm fought the case. Mike was going to be found not guilty. And then, at the last second, he took a plea deal to protect his friends and went to prison. That was the payoff viewers had waited 5 seasons for. The thing that was supposed to be the end of everything. And how long did it last? Less than a year of in-show time. Mike spent only a few months in prison. He came out with his record more or less cleared. Within one more season, he had passed the bar, become a real lawyer, and was back working at the firm. The thing that was built up as the end was treated like a bump in the road. There is a writer for Screen Rant who looked at this and pointed out how strange it was. The show spent nearly 5 full seasons telling us that if the secret got out, Mike's life was over. Then the secret got out, and within a season and a half, Mike's life was not over at all. He was a lawyer again. He was married. He moved to Seattle and ran his own firm. Everything was fine. That pattern of building up a huge threat and then undoing it almost as soon as it happens is the same pattern you can see everywhere else in the show. The stakes feel huge in the moment. Then the stakes go away. Then a new thing that feels huge in the moment shows up. The whole system is built to keep running forever, and the only way to keep it running forever is to make sure nothing ever really sticks. You can compare this to how other shows handle their central secrets, and the difference is sharp. On Breaking Bad, when the truth about Walter White finally comes out to his family, the show changes. There is no going back. The rest of the story has to deal with the fact that the secret is gone. On The Americans, when the truth about what the parents really do comes out to their children, the show changes. On Mad Men, when Don Draper's real name is revealed to the people in his life, Each reveal actually costs him something. Those shows treat a secret like a loaded gun. Once it goes off, everything after it is different. Suits treats the secret more like a trick candle. You blow it out. A second later, it relights itself. A little smoke, a little surprise, and you go back to dinner. That works for a while. It works great in the first 2 or 3 seasons because the candle trick is fun. But by season 5, you start to notice that the candle is never actually going out. And that moment of noticing is the moment the show starts to feel repetitive. Because the engine at the center of it all turns out to be an engine that was designed from the very first episode to never really stop. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And here is the strange thing. The show actually knew this about itself. You can see it in the way the writers kept trying to raise the stakes in other ways by putting the firm itself in danger over and over again, with new rivals, new takeovers, new changes to the name on the wall. Because if the secret at the center of the show could not give them the drama they needed anymore, they had to find drama somewhere else. And the place they kept finding it was the firm. Which is its own problem, because the firm, just like the secret, turned out to be something the writers could never really let fall apart. It just had to look like it was falling apart, over and over again, in ways that a careful viewer could almost set their watch to. Section 3. The firm name as confession. 13 names in 9 seasons. If you want proof that Suits was running the same kind of story over and over, you do not have to hunt for it. You do not have to dig through old episodes or compare plot points. You do not even have to watch the show. You can see it just by looking at the sign on the wall at the front of the firm. That sign, the one that lists the names of the partners in big gold letters, changes so often during the run of Suits that it becomes its own little running joke. And by the time the show ends, even the show itself is in on the joke. The firm in Suits is not a small place. It is one of the biggest, most powerful law firms in New York City, according to the show's own world. Real firms like that, in real life, almost never change their names. They might add a name here and there over many decades. They might drop a name when a partner dies or retires. But the basic name on the door tends to stay stable for years. Clients expect it. The brand is tied to it. The building is tied to it. The paperwork, the business cards, the websites, the courtrooms, the partners' personal reputations, all of these are tied to the name of the firm. Not in Suits. In Suits, the firm changes its name 13 different times. Let that number sit for a second. 13. Over 9 seasons. Which means that, on average, the firm changes its name more than once per season. Some seasons have 2 changes in them. Some have 3. There are only a couple of seasons where the sign on the wall stays the same from start to finish. And every time the name changes, it changes because of a big, dramatic event. A power grab, a betrayal, a merger, a blackmail, a death, a leaving, a firing, a takeover. The name on the wall is the scoreboard for who is winning the battle for the firm at any given moment. Let us walk through the list. The show begins with a firm called Pearson Hardman. Those are 2 of the founding partners, Jessica Pearson and Daniel Hardman. The first season runs mostly under this name. Then, at the start of season 2, Daniel Hardman comes back, tries to take over the firm, fails, and is pushed out. So the name becomes just Pearson. That is name number 2. Then, a British firm gets involved, led by a man named Edward Darby. And the firms do a kind of merger. So now the name is Pearson Darby. That is 3. Then Harvey Specter finally makes name partner, which he has been chasing since the first episode. And the name becomes Pearson Darby Specter. That is 4. Then Darby turns out to be untrustworthy, and his name comes off. So now we are at Pearson Spector. That is 5. Then Louis Litt discovers the secret about Mike and uses it to blackmail Jessica into putting his name on the wall. So now it is Pearson Spector Litt. That is 6. Then Jessica takes the fall for Mike's fraud, gets disbarred, and her name comes off, and we get Spector Litt. That is 7. Then Robert Zane joins, and the name becomes Zane Spector Litt. That is 8. Then 2 more partners, Alex Williams and Samantha Wheeler, get added, and the name becomes Zane Spector Litt Wheeler Williams. That is 9. Then Robert takes a fall in season 8 and is disbarred, and the name has to change again. Near the end of the final season, Katrina Bennett becomes name partner. Harvey and Donna leave for Seattle, and the firm settles, at last, on Litt Wheeler Williams Bennett. That is the final name. And even that is not the complete list, because the show also gives us flashbacks to what the firm was called before Jessica and Hardman even took over, when 3 lawyers named Gordon, Schmidt, and Van Dyke ran the place. That is the 13th name, and it only shows up in memories. Now, when you hear a list like that, your first thought might be that it is actually kind of clever. Each name change is the end of a story, and the new name is the start of the next story. Which is true in a way. But when you step back and look at the bigger picture, you start to see something else. You start to see that the name changes are not really moving the firm forward. They are moving it sideways. Each change is the end of one kind of crisis and the beginning of another crisis that turns out to be, underneath the surface, the same kind of crisis as the last one. Watch how the shapes repeat. Hardman comes back and tries to take the firm. The group fights him off. Name changes. Then Darby turns out to be a threat and has to be removed. The group fights him off. Name changes. Then Louis threatens the firm with the secret. The group folds him in. Name changes. Then Jessica's old choices catch up with her, and she has to leave. The group mourns and rebuilds. Name changes. Then Robert joins. Then Robert falls. Then Faye Richardson arrives in season 9 as a new outside threat trying to control the firm. The group fights her off. You could put any of these stories in any order, and it would still feel like the same show. Because the shape is the same. Outside threat arrives. Firm is in danger. Partners close ranks. Firm survives. A name comes off the wall. A name goes on the wall. New status quo. Next story starts. This is not a small detail. This is the central machinery of the show. The name on the wall is both the stakes and the prize in nearly every serious plotline. Characters talk about getting their name on the wall like it is the highest thing a lawyer can achieve. Harvey spends years chasing it. Louis chases it even harder because Louis always feels like he is being left behind. Mike wants it eventually. Rachel, when she becomes a lawyer, wants it. Robert Zane wants it for his family's legacy. Everyone, at some point, looks up at that wall and imagines their name on it. And because the show uses that wall as the prize for so many stories, the wall has to keep changing. If the wall stayed the same, the prize would stop feeling real. So the wall keeps changing, and each change over time means a little bit less. There is a moment near the very end of the show that makes this whole pattern impossible to ignore. It is in Season 9, Episode 10, which is one of the final episodes. At this point, the firm has just gone through yet another crisis, has just settled on yet another new name, and the characters are finally sitting in a place of calm. Harvey and Donna are about to leave for Seattle. Katrina is being made name partner. Louis is still there, holding things together. And in that moment, Louis pulls out the firm's bylaws and announces that he is adding a new rule. From now on, the name of the firm cannot be changed for at least 5 years. He literally writes it into the rules of the firm. That moment is the show looking straight at the camera and admitting that the name has been changing way too much for way too long. It is a joke on itself. It is a confession. And it is also, in a strange way, a small apology. The show is saying, "We know. We noticed too. We did this to you. We are done now." That moment would be funny enough on its own, but Aaron Korsh, the creator, took it even further in an interview with TV Line a few years after the show ended. He was asked about his upcoming spin-off, Suits LA, and the question came up of whether the firm in the new show would also keep changing its name. Korsh said something that can only be read as a joke and a confession at the same time. He said he actually wanted the firm in Suits LA to change names in the very first episode, specifically because the original show did it so often. He was admitting the pattern openly. He was turning it into a running gag across 2 shows. And sure enough, in Suits LA, the firm does change its name inside the first episode. About 20 minutes in, the partner of the main character betrays him, splits the firm in half, and the main character has to rebuild under a new name. It happens that fast. It is a wink. Korsh is saying, "Yes, we know, we did it again, but this time we made it a joke on purpose." There is a reason this is such a strong piece of evidence for the idea that Suits was repetitive. It is because the writers knew. That is the key point. They were not tricking themselves. They were not blind to the pattern. They saw it clearly. By the last season, they were making jokes about it inside the show. After the show ended, the creator was making jokes about it in interviews. A group of people does not make jokes about a pattern unless that pattern is real, and unless they know it is real. So when critics looked at Suits and said, "This show is repeating itself," it was not an unfair attack. It was the same observation the writers were making about their own work. Why did the firm have to keep changing names, though? Why was it the default move every time the show needed new drama? The answer goes back to a problem we talked about earlier. In a blue sky show, permanent damage is not allowed. You cannot really lose. You cannot really break. So if you want something that looks like permanent damage, you need a symbol. You need a visible sign that the world has shifted. The name on the wall is a perfect symbol. It is public. It is physical. It is written in gold. When it changes, it feels like something big has happened. But when you look at what actually changed in the lives of the characters, the answer is usually very little. Harvey is still Harvey. Louis is still Louis. Donna is still Donna. The office is still the same office. The clients are mostly the same clients. The fights are mostly the same fights. The name is a costume change for the firm, and the firm puts on a new costume whenever the show needs the feeling of a reset without the cost of an actual one. This is also why the name changes hit a point, somewhere around the middle of the show, where they stopped feeling like surprises. The first time Hardman came back and the name changed, it was shocking. The first time Louis bullied his way onto the wall, it was intense. By the time Zane's name was going up and then coming down again a season later, and then Alex and Samantha were being added, most viewers had stopped reacting to it. You could feel the beat coming. A crisis was building. A partner was going to leave, or a new partner was going to be added. The sign was going to be taken down, and a new sign was going to go up. The characters in the show would make speeches about what the new name meant. And then, the next story would begin. There is one more piece to this that makes it even sharper. In the real world, a firm that changed its name 13 times in 9 years would not survive. Clients would flee. Opposing firms would laugh. Judges would lose track of who was representing whom. The Bar Association would notice. Everything about how a big law firm actually works depends on a steady identity. Suits ignored all of that, because in the world of the show, the name was not really about business. It was about feelings. It was about which character had won that round. It was a trophy, not a brand. That choice, to treat the name of the firm like a scoreboard for personal drama, is one of the single biggest reasons the show ended up feeling repetitive. Because once you have decided that the name on the wall is your main prize, you have to keep giving it away and taking it back. You have to keep creating new reasons for it to change. Every season needs a new challenger, a new claim, a new betrayal, a new reconciliation. And there are only so many ways to stage those kinds of fights before you are staging the same fight you already staged 3 seasons ago, just with a different actor in the villain's chair. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which brings us to the one character who more than any other shows this pattern at work inside a single person. He is the one whose wins and losses the firm keeps catching in its name. He is the one who blackmails his way onto that wall and then almost gets knocked off again. He is the one whose name is still there at the very end, after almost everyone else has left. And he is also the character who proves, more clearly than anyone else in the show, how Suits would build up something great and then flatten it back down, again and again, to keep its world safe. Section 4. The Louis Litt Reset. The character who can't stay broken. Louis Litt is the most interesting character in Suits. That is not a controversial opinion. Almost everyone who watches the show will tell you the same thing if you ask them. Harvey is the star, Mike is the heart, Donna is the glue, Jessica is the boss. But Louis is the one who keeps surprising you. Louis is the one who can go from hilarious to heartbreaking inside a single scene. Louis is the one who wants so badly to be loved and so badly to be respected, and who keeps ruining his own chances at both in ways that feel painfully real. Rick Hoffman, the actor who plays him, brings a kind of desperate energy to the part that you do not usually see in a network legal drama. Louis is the reason a lot of people stay with the show long after the main plot has started to feel old. But Louis is also the clearest case study in what is wrong with Suits. Because Louis is the character the show built up into something genuinely great, something dark and complicated and dangerous, and then, again and again, rolled back into something safer and smaller. Louis should have been a fully formed villain. Louis should have been a real threat. Louis had every ingredient you would need to become one of the scariest, most memorable antagonists in television. And every time the show got close to letting him be that, the show pulled him back, hugged him, and turned him into comic relief for a few episodes to reset the mood. Watching this happen once is interesting. Watching it happen 3 or 4 times in the same shape over 9 seasons is the single clearest proof that Suits was not willing to let its own best ideas grow. Louis is introduced in the very first episode as a man who already feels left behind. Harvey is about to be promoted to senior partner, and Louis, who has been at the firm the same amount of time, is being passed over. We do not know Louis yet, but within his first few scenes, we know what his life looks like inside the firm. He walks in wanting the deal that has been given to Harvey. Jessica tells him no. He does not take it well. He leaves. He goes back to his office. He tries to find a way to claw back some of the respect he feels he is owed. This pattern of Louis wanting something, Louis being denied, Louis trying to take it in a more crooked way, is set up in the pilot. And the show will run that pattern on him for 9 seasons. In the first season, Louis is mostly used as a bully. He picks on the younger lawyers. He tries to sabotage Mike. He makes life hard for Harvey and Donna in small ways. But even inside that early version of Louis, the show plants real feelings. You see him hurt when people leave him out of things. You see him desperate to be included. You see him doing hard, unglamorous work on cases and getting no credit for it. The character is deeper than he first looks, and that depth pays off when the show starts giving him more room. In Season 2, Daniel Hardman comes back to the firm and starts to play on Louis's feelings of being left out. Hardman is smart. He knows exactly which buttons to push. He pulls Louis onto his side, and Louis helps Hardman in his takeover attempt. Then, when Louis realizes what he has really done, he is crushed. He has betrayed the people who took care of him. He has thrown in with the wrong side. The scene where Louis comes clean and faces the consequences is one of the strongest of the early seasons, because the character is genuinely broken. He has hurt people. He has hurt himself. He has to live with it. And then, a few episodes later, the show mostly folds him back in. The hurt is dealt with quickly. The friendship returns. Louis is back to being the guy you make jokes about, with his mud baths and his cats and his soft spots. This is the first instance of the pattern. Louis goes dark. Louis does real damage. Louis gets forgiven and reset. And the audience is told, without being told, that this is how things work here. No matter how bad Louis gets, he will be back in the fold in time for the next office party. The biggest test of this pattern comes in Season 4. Louis has been having a rough run. He has gotten himself tangled up in a deal with a man named Charles Forstman, and that deal involves tax fraud. When it comes out, Louis is pushed out of the firm entirely. He loses his job. He loses his standing. He loses his name on the door. He is a broken man, sitting in his apartment, with nothing left of the life he built. And then, by accident, he discovers the single most dangerous secret in the show. He finds out that Mike Ross never went to law school. This is the moment where the show could have gone somewhere it had never gone before. Because now Louis, who has just had everything taken away from him, is holding the knife. He can destroy the firm that cast him out. He can destroy Harvey, who has always looked down on him. He can destroy Jessica, who has kept him in second place. He can destroy Mike, who has been eating up attention that Louis feels should have been his. One phone call, one letter, one meeting with the Bar Association, and the whole world falls over. And for a few episodes, Louis actually uses the knife. He walks back into the firm and tells Jessica exactly what he knows. He tells her that if she does not put his name on the wall and make him a full name partner, he will tell the world what Mike really is. He is not bluffing. He is not shaking. He has been hurt so many times in so many small ways that the pain has finally hardened into something else. He looks at Jessica with a kind of cold fury that is unlike anything the character has shown before. And he wins. Jessica gives in. The firm becomes Pearson Specter Lit. Louis has used blackmail to become what he always wanted to be. This stretch of Louis's story, which is only about 6 episodes long, is widely considered the strongest run of material the show ever produced. Critics have written about it. Fans talk about it. There is a piece from Screen Rant in 2025 that argues, pretty convincingly, that Louis was the best villain Suits ever had. and that the show threw the chance away. The reason Louis worked as a villain in those episodes is that he was finally doing what the show had been suggesting he might do for years. He was no longer asking for respect. He was taking it by force. He was a real threat to every other main character. He was holding real power over people who were used to holding power over him. And every scene he was in crackled with the possibility that he would actually pull the trigger. Now watch what the show does with this material. 3 episodes after Louis makes his big move, Harvey sits him down and talks to him. Mike sits him down and talks to him. And the show, very quickly, starts treating the whole thing like a family argument that went a little too far. The damage Louis did, the fact that he blackmailed his own boss and held a career-ending threat over his own friends, gets softened. Within a handful of episodes, Louis is back to being Louis, back to the mud baths, back to the jokes about his cat, back to being the lovable oddball who just wants to be accepted. The darkness is gone. The knife is put away. The character who should have been remembered as one of the scariest people in the firm is quietly turned back into the character who is scared of not being invited to dinner. There is a reason this happened. The show has talked about it, and people around the show have talked about it. Suits was built as a blue sky drama, which we already covered in Section 1. That meant it could not sustain a true, long-running darkness in one of its main cast. If Louis stayed a villain, the whole feel of the show would change. Every office scene would be tense. Every funny moment would have a shadow over it. The warmth that the network wanted, the warmth that made the show easy to watch, would be gone. So Louis had to be pulled back. Not because the writers did not see his potential, not because Rick Hoffman could not handle it, but because the show's rules would not allow him to stay dark for long. And those rules were stronger than any single idea the writers had. The sad part is that once you see this pattern once, you can see it every time after. Louis keeps having these near breakdowns, these moments where the real character comes out, and then he always gets smoothed back over. In Season 5, he snaps and pushes Harvey through a glass table after finding out that Harvey slept with his sister. That is not a joke. That is a real, violent moment. The show treats it seriously for maybe 1 episode, and then they go back to working together. In later seasons, Louis has panic attacks, goes to therapy, falls in love, loses love, gets physically attacked in a mugging, almost leaves the firm more than once. Each of these moments has real weight in the episode it happens in. Each of them should change him. And each of them, by the time 2 or 3 episodes have passed, has quietly faded into the background. Louis is back in his office. Louis is making one of his speeches. Louis is making up with Harvey again. The reset button has been pressed. The show is warm again. This matters for understanding why Suits feels repetitive. Because Louis is supposed to be the show's secret weapon. He is the character with the most room to grow, the most emotional range, the biggest contrast between who he is and who he wants to be. In a different kind of show, Louis would go on a long arc. He would slowly turn bitter. Or he would slowly find peace. Or he would build a real rival practice and become a genuine threat. Or he would have a long, painful fall from the firm he helped build. Any of those stories would have been interesting. Any of those stories would have given the show something it did not already have. But Suits could not tell those stories, because Suits could not afford to lose Louis as the warm, funny person he is between crises. Louis had to stay in the fold. So every time he moved toward somewhere new, the writers found a way to reel him back. There is a moment in Season 9, near the very end of the show, that makes this especially clear. Louis, after 9 years of being second, is finally being put first. He is getting married. He is becoming a father. He is being made managing partner. The show is lining up all of his dreams and handing them to him at once. That sounds nice, and it is nice in the moment. But think about what it costs. Louis's whole appeal was the gap between who he was and who he wanted to be. That gap was the engine of the character. When the show closes the gap, the character still feels warm, but he stops feeling alive. The things that made him sharp, the hunger and the hurt and the need, all go quiet. He becomes comfortable. And a comfortable Louis is a Louis without a story. The other main characters get something similar at the end. Harvey gets Donna. Jessica gets her second chance in Chicago. Mike and Rachel get Seattle. Everybody ends up happy. That is what a Blue Sky show does. It ends warm. But the price for that warmth is that the characters who had the most interesting dark sides have to give them up. And Louis, who had the most interesting dark side of all, gives up the most. If you want a short version of everything wrong with how Suits handled its own best ideas, Louis Litt is that short version. The show built him into something special. The show backed off every time he became too special to safely keep inside the blue sky box. The show reset him. The show reset him again. The show reset him a third time, and a fourth, and a fifth, until you could almost feel the reset coming a few minutes before it happened. And every reset made the show a little smaller, because every reset taught the audience that nothing in this world was ever really going to change. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which raises a question that becomes harder to avoid the longer you sit with it. If a character as loud and messy as Louis could be flattened this many times, what happened to the quieter story the show tried to run alongside him? The slow one. The one about two people in the same office who had been dancing around each other since long before the show even started. The one that should have been the simplest story in the whole series to tell, and somehow ended up taking almost a decade to land. Section 5. The Harvey and Donna Stall. An 8-season tease with nowhere to go. There is a certain kind of television romance that everyone recognizes, even if they cannot name it. Two people work together. They are sharp with each other. They finish each other's sentences. They know each other better than they know anyone else. They have a running joke nobody else understands. They flirt in a way that is almost too open to be called flirting, but also too careful to be called anything more. And every person watching the show, from the very first episode, can see where this is going. The show can see it too. The writers can see it. The actors can see it. The only people who cannot see it, or who pretend they cannot see it, are the two people actually in the room. That is Harvey Specter and Donna Paulson. From the very first scene they share, the chemistry is loud. Donna is Harvey's secretary. She has been his secretary for years before the show starts. She knows his moods, his habits, the way he knots his tie, the shirts he wears when something is wrong. She finishes his thoughts. She teases him in a way no other employee would ever dare. She takes up space in his office like she has always been there. And Harvey, who is supposed to be the coldest, most controlled man in New York, softens around her in ways he does not soften around anyone else. Donna is the only person who can make him look like an actual human being. Fans of the show noticed this immediately. They gave the pairing a nickname almost at once. They wrote about it. They waited. They were patient. And the show made them wait. Not a season, not 2 seasons, not 3. the show made them wait almost until the very end, through 8 full seasons, before the pair finally became an actual couple. The moment when Harvey finally shows up at Donna's door happens in the final episode of Season 8. That is more than 7 years in viewing time of teasing, delaying, backing away, and teasing again. Now, a long, slow romance is not, by itself, a bad thing. Some of the most beloved TV couples in history took years to get together. Ross and Rachel on Friends, Jim and Pam on The Office, Mulder and Scully on The X-Files. What makes a long, slow romance work is that the wait has to feel like it is going somewhere. Every season, the two people have to get a little bit closer. They have to face a little more honesty. They have to inch forward in a way that the audience can feel. When that happens, the long wait becomes the reward. When that does not happen, the long wait becomes a tease. And a tease that goes on too long starts to feel like the show is just wasting your time. Suits crossed that line with Harvey and Donna. It crossed it hard. And one of the reasons it crossed it is something the show did very early on, in Season 3, that locked the whole romance into an impossible place. In Season 3, Episode 6, Suits gives us a flashback. It is called The Other Time, and it shows us Harvey and Donna years before either of them worked at Pearson Hardman. They were both at the district attorney's office. They had not yet teamed up for the long haul. And in that flashback, the show reveals something major. Harvey and Donna slept together. They had a real moment. A romantic one. It was not just a flirtation. It was not just a tease. It was a night that mattered. And then, the morning after, they made a choice. Donna said she did not mix work and personal life. Harvey was about to bring her with him to a big new firm. If they were going to work together, they could not be together. So they agreed to bury it. They agreed to act like it never happened, and they went on to spend more than a decade pretending that the door between them was closed. That flashback is a beautiful scene. It is one of the more genuinely moving things the show ever produces. But it also, by its nature, changes the whole meaning of their relationship from that point on. Because now the audience knows something important. The romance is not a possibility. It already happened. The door is not closed. It is just being held shut from the inside by two people who have decided, for work reasons, that it has to stay shut. This is not a slow build anymore. This is a denial. And a denial is a very different thing to sustain dramatically than a slow build. A slow build can take years because the two people are slowly discovering their feelings. A denial can only go for so long before the audience starts to get frustrated, because the two people are not discovering anything. They already know. They are just choosing not to act. And every time the show has them dance around the topic after Season 3, the audience, whether they realize it or not, is asking the same question. What are you two waiting for? You already did this. You already crossed this line. You both remember. Why are we still here? The show does not have a good answer to that question, so it invents obstacles, one after another. And each obstacle, while it lasts, gives the show a reason to keep the door closed. But when you step back and look at the full list of obstacles, you start to see how thin they are. In the first few seasons, the obstacle is simply that Harvey does not want to risk losing Donna as his assistant. That is a real reason, and it works for a while. But the show uses it longer than it should. By Season 4, Donna leaves Harvey to go work for Louis instead. So now, the main practical reason for them not being together, that they work in the same office, is gone. They still could not be romantic in a totally professional way, sure, but the original obstacle has dissolved. and yet they still do not move. So the show invents new obstacles. Donna starts dating a British lawyer named Stephen Huntley, who turns out to be involved in a murder case. Harvey clearly does not like the relationship, but he does not say anything about his own feelings, so nothing moves forward. In Season 5, Donna is feeling stuck, and in a moment that has been building for years, she walks into Harvey's office and kisses him. It is a real kiss. It is the kind of kiss that in any other show would finally break the dam. Donna pulls back immediately and tells him she just had to know. Then she leaves. And Harvey, instead of running after her or processing it over a few episodes or having any real conversation about what it meant, mostly just acts like nothing happened. The kiss gets filed away. The status quo is protected. In Season 7, the show gives Harvey a new relationship. He starts dating his therapist, Dr. Paula Agard. She is the person helping him deal with his panic attacks, which have been triggered partly by Donna quitting to work for Louis. Paula eventually figures out that Harvey has unresolved feelings for Donna. She asks him directly to choose. And that relationship falls apart. Donna, during that same season, tells Harvey she loves him. She actually says it. Harvey, still, does not fully reciprocate. And the season ends with them still separate. By this point, we are in year 7 of the show. 7 years of watching these two people circle each other. 7 years of meaningful looks, near confessions, third-party love interests, sudden kisses, and fights that almost, but do not quite, become confessions. Gabriel Macht, the actor who plays Harvey, said in an interview with Entertainment Weekly that the two characters had to stumble along the way and go through other relationships to understand that what they really needed was right in front of their face the whole time. That is a generous way to describe it. But another way to describe it is that the show kept giving them false starts because it did not know what to do with them as a real couple. Here is the key insight. The problem was not the wait. The problem was that the show had no plan for after the wait. And you can see it in how fast everything moves once they finally get together. At the end of Season 8, during a conversation with the newly arrived Samantha Wheeler, Harvey has a sudden realization. He looks around and Donna is not there, and he understands all at once that she is the only person who has ever really been there for him. He gets up. He goes to her apartment. He kisses her. The wait is over. Season 9 picks up the very next morning, with the two of them in bed together. After 8 years of dancing, the actual couple part of their story gets one short season. Just 10 episodes. They are hardly a couple for any of it, before they are also dealing with a new crisis at the firm, a new rival named Faye Richardson, and a full-on wedding plot. They only actually get married in the series finale, which means they were a real couple, in the present tense of the show, for less time than they were not a couple. Think about what that tells you. For 8 seasons, the show held back the relationship that everyone watching was there for. And when it finally let the relationship happen, it gave that relationship almost no room to breathe. The wait was the whole point. The actual getting together was an afterthought. There is a piece from Screen Rant, written in 2024, that makes this exact argument. It calls Harvey and Donna the most controversial couple on the show and says, pretty bluntly, that the way the show dragged out their story almost ruined the show itself. The writer points out that if the romance had started earlier, even by a season or two, the show could have told new kinds of stories. It could have shown Donna and Harvey supporting each other as partners, not just as friends. It could have shown Donna helping Harvey work through his family issues, his panic attacks, his fear of commitment, from inside the relationship rather than from the outside. It could have shown Harvey being there for Donna during the hard choices of her career. It could have, in other words, given the show a new source of stories at a time when the show was running out of new sources of stories. But Suits did not do any of that. Instead, it kept running the same kind of episode over and over with these two. A slight moment, a pullback, a third-party relationship to delay things, a fight, a reconciliation that did not actually change anything. Repeat. This is the same pattern you can see in Louis' storylines, and the same pattern you can see with Mike's secret, and the same pattern you will see everywhere in the show once you know how to spot it. The show built a romantic engine. The engine ran. But the engine was not allowed to actually go anywhere, because if it went somewhere, the show would have had to change, and the show was not allowed to change. There is even a very small, funny detail that shows how stuck the show got. Harvey and Donna have a running inside joke about a can opener. It is first mentioned in the early seasons. It is a thing they share that nobody else understands. The show makes a big deal of it over time. Characters reference it. The audience is trained to see it as a sign that these two have a private language. And yet, the show never actually explains what the joke means. Aaron Korsh has admitted in interviews that there was no real answer. The can opener was just a way of showing that Harvey and Donna had their own world together. It was a symbol of closeness without any specific content inside it, which is kind of a perfect picture of how the show handled this whole relationship. A lot of suggestion, a lot of vibe, but very little movement. When you compare this to how a show with more patience and less fear handles a long romance, the difference is sharp. Jim and Pam on The Office were a couple by the start of season 4. The show had 4 more seasons to explore what it was like to actually be those two people in love, raising kids, dealing with real life. That was where the best stories lived. Not in the will they, won't they, but in the after. Suits decided to stay in the will they, won't they for 8 years. And the show paid for that choice by running the same slow burn beats so many times that the burn stopped being slow and started being flat. There is one more thing worth saying about Harvey and Donna. The after story that the show barely got to tell actually ended up getting told a little bit in the spin-off that came years later. In Suits LA, Harvey shows up as a guest character. He mentions, in passing, that he and Donna have a child together. He jokes about wearing her clothes around the house. We see, in these small references, glimpses of the married life the original show never had time to show us. It is almost sad to watch, because it is clear from those tiny moments that there was a whole other show that could have been made with those two as a real couple. A warmer show, a more grown-up show, a show that might have been the best version of Suits. But that show never happened. The wait ate it. __quote _for __. And the wait was not just a problem for Harvey and Donna. The wait, as a pattern, is one of the biggest things Suits did with all of its stories. A big dramatic engine, introduced early, with the possibility of an explosion at the end. And then a refusal to ever let the explosion happen. Over and over, for years. Mike's secret is one version of it. The firm name changes are another version of it. Louis's slow slide is another version of it. Harvey and Donna are just the most personal version of it. Once you learn to see the wait, you start to see that almost every story in Suits is built the same way, using only a small handful of shapes that get dressed up differently each time. Which raises the obvious next question. If the show really is running on such a small number of shapes, how few are we actually talking about? And what are they? Section 6. The 5 dramatic engines. Why every plot is one of 5 stories. Here is an experiment you can try at home, if you have ever watched Suits or ever plan to. Pick any multi-episode story arc from any season. Not a single episode, an arc. A run of 4 or 5 or 6 episodes that tells one bigger story. Write down in one sentence what that story is about. Then do it again with another arc from a different season. And another. Keep going. Do 10 of them, 15, 20. If you do this long enough, you start to notice something that is almost funny. The sentences start sounding the same. Not identical, but the same in shape. The names change, the villains change, the specific crime or deal or betrayal changes. But underneath all of that, the bones of the story keep repeating. And when you sort your sentences into piles, based on what the story actually is, most of them fall into just 5 piles. 5. That is the number. 9 seasons of television, 134 episodes, dozens of arcs. And when you strip it all the way down, the show is running on 5 basic kinds of stories. Everything else is decoration. Different clothes, different faces, different cities mentioned in the background. But the same 5 engines, rearranged and reskinned over and over for almost a decade. Let us walk through them one at a time, because once you see them clearly, you cannot unsee them. The first engine is the one we have already spent a lot of time on. Someone new finds out about Mike's secret. This is the oldest engine the show has. It is there in the pilot when Mike and Harvey first make their deal. It is still there in season 9 when Mike comes back and the old danger comes with him. In between, the engine fires over and over. Harvey knows. Donna finds out. Jessica finds out. Rachel finds out. Lewis finds out. Katrina notices. Scotty is told. The Harvard professor works it out. A banker named Jonathan Sidwell catches on. A woman named Sheila Saz writes a letter Mike's grandmother might or might not know. Robert Zane gets pulled in. The whole pattern is the engine turning. A new person gets close. The circle tightens. A crisis builds. Then the circle opens, the person is absorbed, and the engine resets, ready for the next turn. The second engine is the hostile takeover. This is the engine where an outside force, sometimes an old enemy, sometimes a new rival, sometimes a whole other law firm, tries to take over Pearson Hardman, or Pearson, or whatever the firm is called that season. The firm is always in danger. The firm has always just barely survived the last attack. The firm is always about to be swallowed, or split, or drained by someone who has walked in the door with a briefcase full of plans. Daniel Hardman comes back in season 2 and tries to do it. Edward Darby merges in and then turns out to be a problem. Robert Zane, before he becomes a friend, is for a time a rival who tries to pull the whole firm apart. In the final season, a woman named Faye Richardson arrives from the Bar Association, sent to control the firm from inside. And while she is not a classic takeover villain, she functions exactly the same way. An outside force, arriving with the power to break the firm, forcing everyone inside to band together and push her out. The details change. The power that the villain brings changes. But the shape is the same every time. A threat walks in. The partners circle up. The threat is defeated. The firm lives. The name on the wall moves a little. Next season, a new threat walks in. The third engine is the Louis Reset, which we already covered in detail in Section 4. Louis feels slighted. Louis does something rash. Louis is exposed. Louis is forgiven. The show hugs him and moves on. This engine fires more often than any of the others, because Louis is a character who is always somewhere in the cycle. Even when he is not at the center of the main plot, a small version of the Louis engine is usually running in the background of the episode. He is upset about not being invited. He is worried that Harvey does not respect him. He does something petty. He makes up for it. He gets his emotional beat. He comes back to the group. The engine can run at full size over 5 or 6 episodes, as it does in the blackmail arc. Or it can run at small size, inside one episode, in a subplot about a mud bath that went wrong. But it is the same engine at every size. The fourth engine is the Harvey and Mike rift. This one you also know, even if you have not named it before. Harvey and Mike have a fight. The fight is about loyalty or ethics, or who crossed whose line. They stop speaking. They work against each other for a stretch of episodes. Then, through some combination of a crisis, a mutual friend, and a moment of honesty, they make up. They come back together. The father-son bond that anchors the whole show is restored. This engine first fires hard in Season 4, in a long arc around a man named Charles Forstmann. Mike is working at a bank at this point, and gets pulled into a deal with Forstmann that puts him across the table from Harvey on a big fight over a company called Gillis Industries. Mike is also getting tangled up with a man named Logan Sanders, who turns out to have once been involved with Rachel. The whole thing is messy and nasty. Mike and Harvey say terrible things to each other. The firm suffers. It looks, for a while, like the relationship might not survive. And then it does. Of course it does. A few episodes later, the two are back in Harvey's office, cracking jokes. The engine ran. The engine reset. The engine is now loaded again for the next rift, which will come in Season 6, when Mike is fresh out of prison and is questioning the cost of everything Harvey has done. And then again in Season 9, when Mike returns as opposing counsel on a case about a shoe company called Brick Street. The specific trigger is different each time. The basic story is the same. The two closest people in the show fall out. The two closest people in the show get back together. The show tells you, through the fallout and the makeup, that their bond is bigger than any single mistake. Which is another way of saying that the bond cannot really be broken. Which is another way of saying that the engine has nowhere to go. It can only spin. The fifth engine is the return of an old enemy. This one is the pure repetition engine, the one that pretty much every long-running show ends up leaning on. A villain from an earlier season who seemed to be finished comes back. They have a new plan. They are angrier this time. They want revenge. Daniel Hardman comes back more than once. Travis Tanner, a rival lawyer from the first couple of seasons, comes back. Charles Forstmann's presence lingers even after he is dealt with. Frank Gallo, a prisoner Harvey once put away, shows up to torment Mike while Mike is in jail, and then shows up again later to cause more trouble on the outside. The Special Master, Faye, in the final season, functions the way a returning villain does, even though she is technically new. Each return follows the same path. The villain appears, looking confident. The main cast is caught off guard. There is a period of damage. The main cast finds a way to fight back, usually by outsmarting the villain at something the villain thought they had mastered. The villain is beaten again. Everyone goes home. And then, a season or two later, another old enemy shows up, or the same one returns with a new scheme. The engine spins again. So that is the list. 5 engines. The secret finding out engine. The hostile takeover engine. The Lewis reset engine. The Harvey and Mike rift engine. The returning enemy engine. Now, here is the thing that makes the show so watchable, even with only 5 engines. The engines are not used one at a time. The show layers them on top of each other. A single season of Suits usually has 3 or 4 of these engines running at once. Somebody is finding out about Mike in one subplot. The firm is under attack in the main plot. Louis is having a small reset in the background. Harvey and Mike are fighting over how to handle the attack. A returning villain might be pulling the strings from off-screen. Each engine, by itself, would feel thin after a while. But when you stack them together and you weave them through each other, the show feels busy. It feels like a lot is happening. The pace covers for the repetition. But if you slow down and look at just one engine at a time, across the whole 9 seasons, you can see how often each engine fires. You can see that the secret engine fires in every single season of the show. You can see that the hostile takeover engine fires in at least 6 of the 9 seasons. You can see that the Louis reset engine fires, in at least some form, in every season. You can see that the Harvey and Mike rift engine fires in at least 4 seasons, including twice in a row, in slightly different forms, in the middle of the show. You can see that a version of the returning enemy engine fires in at least 5 or 6 seasons, often with the same actors coming back to play the same parts. This is not an accident. This is what a show does when it cannot let its world really change. When you cannot kill people. When you cannot permanently break the firm. When you cannot let the central secret actually go off. When you cannot let your best villains stay dark. When you cannot let your main romance grow. You have to go back to the same wells again and again for water. The engines are the wells. The wells are deep enough to last a while. But water from the same well tastes like the same water, no matter how many different cups you pour it into. Here is another way to see it. Take one of the most important story arcs in the show. In Season 4, the firm is under attack by Robert Zane and Charles Forstman and their allies, which is Engine 2. At the same time, Mike is fighting with Harvey over the Gillis Industries deal, which is Engine 4. At the same time, Lewis is getting pulled into a bad tax situation with Forstman and will eventually be pushed to the edge, which leads into Engine 3. At the same time, Professor Henry Gerard, a Harvard ethics professor, is getting close to figuring out that Mike was never in his class, which is Engine 1. And hovering over the whole thing, Daniel Hardman is circling again, waiting for another shot at the firm, which is Engine 5. All 5 engines at once. That is what a packed season of Suits looks like. That is why it feels dense. That is why it feels like the writers have a lot going on. But look at what the show is actually running. The same 5 things. The same 5 shapes stacked on top of each other. Now compare that to Season 8, near the end of the show. Samantha Wheeler, a new character, is being introduced. She has a history with Robert Zane. There is tension at the firm over power. Alex Williams, another newer character, is balancing his history with a man named Eric Kaldor. Harvey is dealing with his feelings about Donna and his relationship with Paula Agard and his anxiety. Mike and Rachel are leaving. Louis is falling in love with Sheila again. And there is a conflict brewing with a man named Andrew Malick who is coming after the firm. If you look at that list without the names, what do you see? You see Engine 2 with a new outside threat. You see Engine 3 with Lewis in another cycle. You see a version of Engine 4 as newer characters replace Mike and Harvey in the older role of the central friend conflict. You see Engine 5 setting up with a returning old enemy. The specific people are different. The story shapes are the same. There is a writer at the Saratoga Falcon who made this same point very sharply in a piece about the final stretch of the show. She wrote that the new characters introduced in the last seasons, Samantha Wheeler and Alex Williams, ended up running journeys that mirrored Mike's journey in the earlier seasons. Their arrival was supposed to bring fresh energy to the firm. What it actually did was run the same kinds of stories with new actors in old slots. Samantha has a tough past and has to prove herself. Alex has a secret he is trying to protect. The show uses them the same way it used Mike, and some of the same way it used Lewis, and some of the same way it used Rachel. The engines do not care who is sitting in the seat. The engines just need someone to sit in the seat. As long as someone is there, the engines can keep firing. This is what makes the repetition in Suits different from ordinary TV repetition. It is not that a few stories feel familiar. It is that almost every story, when you boil it down, is one of the same 5 stories. The show survived for 9 seasons not by finding new engines, but by getting very good at disguising the old ones. Different names on the door, different hair on the villain, different law under argument, but the same 5 movements, each one a pattern the audience could almost guess before it happened. Each one ending in a way that brought the group back to where it started, ready to do it all again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And yet, even with only 5 engines, the show somehow makes you care every single time. Episode to episode, you lean in. Episode to episode, you feel the stakes. Even when the engines are repeating in ways you can name, you still get caught up in the fight. That is not an accident. That is craft. That is something the show is doing in the way it writes its scenes and builds its rhythms that keeps you feeling like something big is happening, even when nothing new is happening. There is a trick to that, a very specific trick. And that trick, once you see it, explains why every case on Suits, all the way from the first season to the last, has the same unmistakable shape. Section 7, the magic words problem. Why every case has the same shape. Try something with me. Think of any case Suits has ever shown you. Anyone. A merger, a murder, a lawsuit between a client and their old business partner, a case about a shoe company, a case about a pharmaceutical drug, a case about a famous athlete, a case about a small family business being crushed by a bigger one. Pick whichever comes to mind first. Now close your eyes and try to remember how that case ended. If you watched the show, you already know. In your memory, the ending of almost every case looks the same. 2 people stand across from each other, usually in an office, sometimes in a hallway, sometimes in a conference room with glass walls. One of them, 9 times out of 10, Harvey, delivers a single devastating line. A cold, cutting sentence that tells the other person, in not so many words, that they have lost. The other person's face falls. There is a pause. The music comes up. Harvey turns and walks out. Or the other person walks out. Or somebody just sits there, staring, while the camera holds on them for a beat. Then we cut to commercial, or to the next scene, and the case is over. The deal is signed. The charges are dropped. The settlement is paid. The opposing counsel gives up. This is the shape of almost every case on Suits. And once you see the shape, you see it everywhere. Every season, every arc, every storyline. The cases all end in the same way, because they are all built on the same quiet trick. The trick is what makes the show feel dramatic. The trick is also, in a way, a cheat. And the name for this trick in legal circles is magic words. There is a real law firm called Orsis Gate LLP, which wrote a very funny and pointed article back in 2019 about what Suits gets wrong about being a lawyer. The piece is called "That's Not How Lawyers Work: The Suits Effect." In it, the lawyers who wrote the piece spent time breaking down the specific ways the show bends or breaks the reality of their profession. And they gave this trick a name. They called it magic words. The idea, in their words, was that the characters on Suits say certain tightly written, heated lines to each other at the right moment, and those lines make everything move. Lawsuits get filed, settlements get reached, cases get dismissed, million-dollar deals get inked. One devastating sentence in a hallway, and the whole case shifts. The writers at Orsis Gate pointed out, very politely, that this is not how law actually works. Law, in the real world, is slow. It is full of paperwork. It is full of procedure. There are rules about what can be said in court, rules about what can be filed when, rules about how long you have to respond to things, rules that determine whether a piece of evidence can even be looked at by a jury. The actual work of a lawyer is mostly done sitting down. It is reading. It is writing. It is checking. It is researching. It is talking to other lawyers calmly on the phone. It is almost never, in reality, about dropping one killer line on an opponent and watching the whole case fall over. But Suits is not a documentary. Suits does not want to be a documentary. Suits wants to give you a feeling. The feeling of being the smartest person in the room. The feeling of finally saying the thing you wish you could have said to the boss who wronged you, or the rival who talked down to you, or the enemy who underestimated you. The show is built on a fantasy of winning with your words, and magic words are the delivery system for that fantasy. This is not a criticism, in one sense. Every legal drama does this to some degree. The Good Wife does it. How to Get Away with Murder does it. Even Law and Order does it. You cannot shoot a TV show where a real case takes 2 years. You have to compress. You have to cheat. You have to give the audience a feeling of victory in the space of a 43-minute episode. But what makes Suits stand out is how heavily it relies on this trick, and how the same trick gets used week after week, season after season, until the shape of the trick becomes the shape of the whole show. Watch what happens over and over. A case is introduced. The client walks in, explains the problem. Harvey or Mike or Lewis takes the case. There is a short period of worry. The opposing side seems to have the upper hand. Our heroes hit a wall. Maybe a witness is missing. Maybe a contract seems airtight. Maybe a document they needed is locked up. They are stuck. Then, somewhere around the middle of the episode, there is a research scene. Mike sits in a library, surrounded by books, or at his desk with his laptop open. His memory, which as we know is almost photographic, kicks in. He pulls up an old case, or a forgotten clause, or a law from 20 years ago that nobody else remembered. He finds the loophole. He finds the weapon. He runs to Harvey. Harvey listens. Harvey nods. Harvey says something like, "Let's go." The two of them march into a conference room or an office. They confront the opponent. Harvey delivers the line. The opponent breaks. The case ends. Everyone goes home. If you slow this down and write out the steps, it looks like a recipe. A client, a wall, a research scene, a loophole, a confrontation, a line, a break, a resolution. If you were to hand a new writer on the show an outline for an episode, and you only wrote down those beats, you could get a draft back in a week that would fit right in. The template is that clear. Now, a recipe is not a bad thing. A recipe is how shows run on schedule. A recipe is how you make sure the episode has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But when every episode runs off the exact same recipe, something important starts to happen to the viewer. The tension of any given case stops being about whether the case will be won. The case will be won. You know it will be won. The show has told you, for years, that Harvey and Mike always find the loophole, always deliver the line, always walk out victorious. The only real question left is not will they win, but how will they win? What will the specific line be this time? And a show where the only question is how rather than whether is a show where the heart of the drama has quietly emptied out. There is another piece to this that makes the pattern even more visible. And it has to do with a very specific thing the show does with Mike's memory. When Suits was first designed, Mike's photographic memory was pitched as a clever gimmick, a special ability that made the lead character a bit different from every other legal drama hero. But as the show goes on, the memory becomes less of a character trait and more of a machine. It is the thing that solves problems. It is the thing that produces the loophole right when the loophole is needed. Mike will be in the middle of a research scene, and his eyes will go slightly out of focus, and then he will say a sentence that begins with something like, "I remember this case from 12 years ago." And suddenly, the case is cracked open. The memory, over time, becomes what people in storytelling call a deus ex machina. That is a long Latin phrase that basically means a surprise fix that comes out of nowhere to save the day. And in Suits, Mike's memory plays that role so often that it starts to feel like cheating. A writer at Screen Rant, in a piece from 2024 about the spin-off Suits LA, made this exact point. The writer noted that Mike's photographic memory was often used as an almost magical tool that conveniently solved the problems in the final minutes of the episode. The writer actually argued that Suits LA would be better off not trying to give its new characters a similar gimmick, because the gimmick had already been worn down by years of overuse in the original show. That is how visible the pattern became. Years after the show ended, critics were still pointing to Mike's memory as the thing the writers used when they had written themselves into a corner. The Orsis Gate piece makes another sharp observation about the show that connects to this. The lawyers who wrote it noticed that not only does Mike have an impossibly perfect memory, but so does almost every other lawyer on the show. Harvey remembers everything. Lewis remembers everything. Jessica remembers everything. Any lawyer who needs to win a moment on Suits will suddenly pull out a perfect memory of a specific case or statute from decades ago, recite it word for word, and use it to win. In real life, the actual piece notes, lawyers look things up. All the time. Researching the law is one of the core things lawyers do. Statutes change. Cases change. Even lawyers who have practiced for 40 years say things like, "I have to look into that," because the law does not stand still. On Suits, nobody needs to look anything up. Everybody has every law memorized, which is impossible, but it is essential to the trick. Because if the characters had to actually research things, you could not stage the magic words scene. You could not have Harvey walk in cold and deliver the killing line. Both sides of the argument need to have already done all of their homework, so that the scene can move at the speed of a speech rather than the speed of a book. There is also the question of time. Real legal cases take months, often years. A big case between two companies can drag on for half a decade. Discovery alone, which is the part of the case where both sides share their evidence with each other, can take many months. In Suits, Entire cases begin and end inside 1 or 2 episodes. Somebody walks into the office on Monday, and by Wednesday, the deal is signed and everyone is at a bar. This is another way the show bends reality to fit its recipe. Because a realistic legal timeline would not allow for the magic words scene at the end of the hour. So the timeline collapses and the cases get shrunk down to a size that will fit inside the recipe. Now, here is the clever part of what Suits is doing. The show knows, on some level, that the cases cannot carry the weight of the drama anymore, because the cases are all shaped the same and all one in the same way. So the show starts pushing the real tension into the characters' personal lives around the cases. The case itself is almost a backdrop. The real question is not whether Mike and Harvey will win. It is whether Mike and Harvey will still be on speaking terms by the end. It is whether Louis will feel left out of the win. It is whether Donna will be hurt by what Harvey did to get the win. It is whether the client was really a good person or not, and what that says about the firm. The cases become a kind of stage. The real action is happening on the faces of the people at the edges of the stage. This works for a while. It keeps the show interesting even when the cases start to blur together. But it also hides, behind its personal drama, just how similar the cases really are to each other. And once you start noticing the case pattern, you cannot watch the show the same way again. You start to feel the middle of the episode coming. You start to know when the research scene will land. You start to know when the magic words scene is coming. You can almost feel the commercial break before the show cuts to it, because the rhythm of the episode is so tightly locked to the rhythm of the recipe. There is one last small thing worth saying about this. The show's best moments, the ones fans quote and rewatch, tend to be the magic words scenes. Harvey telling somebody he is the best closer in New York. Harvey saying that when he is backed into a corner, that is when he wins. Donna telling someone that she is Donna, and she knows everything. Louis standing up for himself in a moment of unexpected grace. These moments are genuinely great. They are the show at its sharpest. But think about what that means. The parts of the show that we love the most are the parts that are repeated the most. The scenes that give the show its identity are the same scenes it reuses every episode, which is both the secret of the show's charm and the root of its repetition at the same time. The magic words are the thing that makes Suits feel like Suits. They are also the thing that makes every case feel like every other case. Over 9 seasons, this adds up. Hundreds of cases. Hundreds of magic word scenes. Hundreds of moments where a line is delivered and the opposing side crumbles. Each one, in the moment, feels sharp. Each one, across the whole run of the show, becomes part of a pattern, a rhythm, a shape. A predictable shape that the show cannot break out of, because breaking out of it would mean changing the thing the show is best at. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But a show is more than its cases and its plots. A show is also the people, the core group, the faces you come back to see every week. And here is a strange thing about Suits. The case shape repeats because the recipe demands it. The plot engines repeat because the network demands it. But there is another reason for the repetition that goes deeper than any of those. And it has to do with who the show is actually about. A surprisingly small number of people, stuck in a surprisingly small number of rooms, being pushed to carry the weight of a story that was always a little too big for them. Section 8. The Closed Ensemble Problem. 8 characters, 1 office. Count them. Sit down with any season of Suits, pick any episode, and count the number of characters who actually matter to the story. Not the clients of the week, not the background lawyers who walk past the glass walls, not the judges who show up for a courtroom scene. The real characters, the ones whose feelings move the plot, the ones whose choices change the outcome of an episode. When you finish counting, you will get a surprisingly small number. Most weeks, it is about 8, sometimes 7, sometimes 9, but close to 8. Harvey Specter, Mike Ross, Louis Litt, Jessica Pearson, Donna Paulson, Rachel Zane, Harold Gunderson, and Katrina Bennett float in and out in the early and middle seasons, and Harold never really gets promoted to the core. When Jessica leaves in season 6 and Mike and Rachel leave at the end of season 7, the show scrambles to replace them with new people. Samantha Wheeler, played by Katherine Heigl, is brought in. Alex Williams, played by Dule Hill, is expanded into a main. Robert Zane is promoted from a recurring part into the core. But even with these additions, the count stays around the same. There are always about 8 people in this world who really matter. And there is almost always just one place where the story happens. The firm. Pearson Hardman, Pearson Darby, Pearson Darby Specter, Pearson Specter, Pearson Specter Litt, Zane Specter Litt, Zane Specter Litt Wheeler Williams, and finally, Litt Wheeler Williams Bennett. 13 names across 9 seasons. One building. The same glass hallways. The same open conference room. The same associate's pit. The same office where Harvey sits with his feet up on the desk. The same office where Louis sits with his cat pictures and his painful self-talk. The cases pull characters out to courtrooms or restaurants or opposing firms sometimes, but they always come back. The firm is where the show lives. This is the closed ensemble problem. A small number of people inside a small number of rooms carrying a story that was ordered up to last for a very long time. A closed ensemble is not a bad thing by itself. Some of the best television in history has used a small group of characters in a small place. The original Office kept you mostly inside Dunder Mifflin for 9 seasons. Cheers kept you mostly at the bar. Seinfeld kept you mostly in a few apartments and a diner. But those shows were comedies. The stakes in any given episode were low. 2 people arguing over a sandwich is enough for a great scene in a comedy. A closed ensemble becomes a problem in a drama because a drama needs conflict. And conflict in a drama usually has to come from outside forces pressing in on the main group. Suits is a drama that needs big conflicts every season. A drama that needs high stakes and fresh villains and firm-threatening crises to keep running. And all of that has to be generated inside, or aimed at, a group of about 8 people in one building. Now think about what that math forces the writers to do. Every new conflict has to either come from inside the 8, which means the 8 have to keep fighting each other, or come from outside the 8, which means new outsiders have to keep walking through the door to threaten them. Both of these options, run long enough, create exactly the kind of repetition we have been describing. Watch how the show handles internal conflict. The 8 people have to keep having fights with each other, or else the show has no drama coming from its core. But the show also cannot actually break the 8 apart, because the warmth of the group is what the audience is there for. So the fights have to be intense, but temporary. Big, but fixable. Sharp, but forgivable. Harvey and Mike fall out in season 4, come back together in season 4. Louis blackmails Jessica in season 4, is forgiven by season 5. Donna leaves Harvey to work for Louis in season 5, returns to Harvey in season 6. Rachel and Mike have a crisis of trust, reset. Jessica and Harvey snap at each other, reset. The core 8 cannot be broken. So every fight they have is a fight with a scheduled reset built in from the start. After a while, you can feel the reset coming. You know they will make up, because you know the show cannot keep running if they do not. Now watch how the show handles external conflict. Because the inside can only produce so many fights, the show has to keep pulling in outsiders to threaten the 8. Hardman comes in. Darby comes in. Forstman comes in. Logan Sanders comes in. Tanner comes in and comes back again. Jack Soloff pushes in from inside and acts like an outsider. Gibbs the prosecutor comes in. Frank Gallo comes in. Andrew Malick comes in. Faye Richardson comes in. Every season, at least one new big bad is introduced. Each of them threatens the firm in a slightly different way. Each of them is defeated by the core 8 working together. And each of them, once defeated, either leaves or fades into the background so the next one can be introduced. The outsiders cannot join the 8 because the 8 is already full. The outsiders cannot stay because a stable outsider would change the math of the group. So they arrive, do damage, and leave. Over and over, with different hair. Now think about what happens when the core group has to actually shrink. This is where the closed ensemble problem becomes most visible. Jessica Pearson exits at the end of season 6 because Gina Torres wanted to move on, and the show tries to cover the loss by giving her a short-lived spin-off called Pearson, set in Chicago. Her departure is treated as a huge emotional moment, and it is. Then Mike and Rachel leave at the end of season 7. Patrick J. Adams had decided it was time to move on, and Meghan Markle was leaving television entirely to begin her life with Prince Harry. That is an enormous loss. Mike was one of the 2 lead characters of the entire show. Rachel was a core anchor. The show suddenly has to function without 3 of its 8. What does it do? It fills the slots. Samantha Wheeler is introduced in season 7 and made a central character in season 8. Alex Williams, who had been a smaller part, is brought up to the core. Robert Zane is pulled in fully. Katrina Bennett, who had existed since season 2 as a side character, is promoted. New faces, old slots. The 8 is refilled. The building is still the same, and the stories start to run, again, on the same engines. Samantha has a tough past and has to prove herself, which is a shape we already saw with Mike. Alex has a secret from his earlier career that he is trying to hide, which is a shape we already saw with Mike. Robert becomes a name partner and then is threatened and pushed out, which is a shape we already saw with Jessica. Katrina becomes a name partner at the very end, which is a reward story we already saw with Lewis. The new people are doing the old work, because the structure of the show only has so many jobs for its people to do. A writer at the Saratoga Falcon made this point very clearly in her 2025 piece about the show. She wrote that the journey of Samantha and Alex mirrored Mike's journey early on, and that this made their stories repetitive and boring. She also wrote that the show should have ended when Mike was caught at the end of season 5, because that was the natural ending, and everything after it felt like a drawn-out version of what the show had once been. You can argue with whether the natural ending was really season 5. You cannot argue that replacing the departing core with new characters running old patterns was going to keep the show fresh. It was not going to. It could not. The closed ensemble only has so many roles. Once the roles are set, any new actor who steps into those roles is going to end up doing the same kinds of scenes the old actor did. Part of the charm of Suits was always that the core 8 felt like a family. You could almost feel them getting closer every season. They ate meals together. They lived in each other's offices. They had inside jokes that went on for years. That closeness was the warmth the network had asked for, and it worked. But the cost of that closeness was that the show could never really let anyone leave for good, never really let the building change, never really let an outsider join. And when a show cannot let its own world grow, the world has to loop. The same 8 people, in the same building, fighting the same kinds of fights. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which is why, in the final stretch of the show, even the writers started to show that they knew. They began to wink at the camera. They began to make jokes about the firm changing names. They began to have characters say things like, "This is the kind of thing we do now," which sounds harmless at first, until you realize that a show does not start joking about its own patterns unless those patterns have become impossible to hide. And once a show begins to laugh at itself out loud, the question becomes how much longer it can keep laughing before the joke starts to feel like a goodbye. Section 9. The Self-Awareness Paradox. When the show started making jokes about itself. There is a tell, in writing, that shows up when a team of writers has started to notice something about their own work that they are not quite comfortable with. They do not change it. They do not fix it. They do not rebuild the thing that is making them uneasy. Instead, they start to joke about it. They slip little winks into the script. They let a character turn and look at the camera, not literally, but in the way the line is written, and say something that could almost be read as an apology to the audience. When a show begins doing this, what it is really doing is something very human. It is getting ahead of the criticism. It is saying, "We know, we see it too. Please do not be mad at us. We promise we know." Suits began doing this in its final seasons, and once you learn to see it, you see it everywhere. The show, in its last 2 or 3 years of life, was quietly, and then not so quietly, admitting that it had been running the same stories for a very long time. The admissions were not big speeches. They were small lines, tucked into bigger scenes, easy to miss on a first watch. But added together, they are a clear confession. The writers knew what the show had become. They just did not have a way out of it anymore. So they started to smile at the audience about it, and hoped that the smile was enough. The single clearest example of this is the moment we talked about in Section 3. In the final stretch of Season 9, after the firm has just finished going through yet another crisis and yet another shakeup, Lewis, who is now the managing partner, pulls out the firm's bylaws. He tells his partners that he is adding a new rule. From now on, for at least 5 years, the name of the firm cannot be changed. He is literally writing it into the law of their office that the shuffling has to stop. That line is played as a small character beat for Lewis, a sign that he wants stability in his life as he becomes a father. But it is also, undeniably, the show looking straight at the audience and saying, "We know. We know it changed 13 times. We know. We are done now. Please laugh with us about it." That line does not land as a heavy moment inside the story. It lands as a soft joke. A shared look between the show and the people who have been watching it for 9 years. And the thing about that soft joke is that it only works if both sides are in on it. If you have only watched 1 season of Suits, the bylaws line is barely there. You hear it and move on. But if you have watched every season, if you have seen the name on the wall change over and over, if you have learned to almost set your watch to it, then the line cracks you up. Because it is a confession disguised as a plot point. The show could not make that joke without first doing the thing it is joking about. There is another small moment earlier in the same final season that works the same way. Mike Ross has returned to New York from Seattle for one case. He is now opposing Harvey, representing a basketball player who wants out of a shoe contract with a company called Brick Street. Before the big fight really gets going, there is a moment of banter between Mike and Harvey. Mike, more or less, says to Harvey that this time around, they should try to do this without getting anyone disbarred, or anyone sent to jail, or anyone losing the firm. It is played as a joke between old friends who have been through too much together. But look at what is actually being said. The line is a roll call of the exact things that have happened to them in some form across the run of the show. Disbarment, jail, nearly losing the firm. Mike is listing, on behalf of the writers, the specific repeating patterns that the show has leaned on to create tension. He is saying out loud that these are the things that keep happening to them. He is reminding the audience that they keep happening. And then he is asking, gently, if maybe this time they could skip to a new engine. The joke works because it is true. Then there is Aaron Korsh himself, the creator, who has not been shy about pointing at these patterns after the fact. The clearest example is an interview he gave to TV Line when Suits LA was being developed. He was asked about the new show, and specifically about the firm in it. He said, more or less openly, that he had wanted the firm in Suits LA to change its name in the very first episode, because the original show had done it so often. That was his own joke about his own show. He was not hiding it. He was building the joke into the next show. And sure enough, Suits LA, in its pilot, changes the firm name within the first 20 minutes. The main character's business partner betrays him, splits the firm in half, and the whole thing has to be rebranded before the pilot is even over. That is not a story choice made in the normal way a show gets written. That is a wink across time. Korsh is saying to his returning audience, I know. We both know. Let us get it out of the way at the top this time. That level of self-awareness sounds charming on the surface, and in some ways it is. It is hard to dislike a show that can laugh at itself. Plenty of long-running television series become insufferable in their later seasons because they take themselves too seriously. Suits never quite fell into that trap. It kept a sense of humor about its own size. It never pretended to be more important than it was. And the writers, by the end, were willing to wave at the audience and admit that yes, they had done this joke before. Yes, they knew. But here is the paradox. A show joking about its own repetition does not actually make the repetition go away. It just makes the audience feel a little better about it in the moment. It is a kind of handshake. The show is saying, we acknowledge the problem, so you do not have to bring it up. But the acknowledgement is not the same as a fix. The bylaws joke is funny. It also happens immediately after the firm has just, once again, been through the same kind of external attack and internal recovery it has been through 6 times before. The Mike line about not getting disbarred is clever. It is also inside an arc where Mike has come back and is now engaged in the same kind of fight then reconcile pattern with Harvey that we already saw in Season 4 and Season 6. The shows are still the same shows underneath. The jokes just make the patterns a little easier to sit with. There is a way of thinking about television that says, once a show starts winking at its audience about its own habits, the show has essentially given up on fixing those habits. It has decided that it cannot change, and it has decided that charm is going to have to stand in for growth. That is a very specific choice. It is not necessarily a bad choice. A show in its final year has limited room to try new things. The cast is leaving. The network has already signed off on the ending. The writers are tying ribbons on arcs that have been running for years. The point, by that stage, is not to reinvent the show. The point is to land it. And if a few jokes help the landing go down more smoothly for longtime viewers, that is a fair trade. But the jokes also tell us something honest about the show that is easy to miss. They tell us that the writers knew exactly what they were doing the whole time. They knew they were reusing engines. They knew they were shuffling name partners in the same patterns over and over. They knew Mike's secret had been found out by too many people in too many similar ways. They knew the cases all had the same shape. They knew Lewis had been given the same redemption arc more than once. They were not blind to it. They were not unaware. The repetition was not happening behind their backs. The repetition was the plan, more or less. Because the plan could not really be anything else inside the shape the show was built to fit. And when they reached the end, they were honest enough with their audience to say so, in the only way they could, through little lines tucked into bigger scenes. __, quote _8 __. That honesty is actually one of the most likable things about Suits. It is also what makes the next question so interesting. Because if the show was repetitive by design, and the writers knew it, and the audience eventually figured it out too, then why did it work? Not just in its original run, but in a way the network and the writers and even the audience could not have predicted. Years after Suits ended, years after the last name change was written into the bylaws, years after the final joke landed, the show came back to life in a way no other blue sky drama ever has. And the reason it came back, as strange as it sounds, has almost nothing to do with what made it feel tired the first time around. It might, in fact, be the exact same thing. Section 10. Why it worked anyway. The Netflix paradox and the comfort TV economy. Here is a fact that does not quite fit into any of the sections we have walked through so far. Everything we have talked about, all the ways Suits repeats itself, all the engines that keep firing the same way, all the cases with the same shape, all the name changes, all the walked-back villains, all the delayed romances, all the 8 people in one building doing the same kinds of work over and over. All of that should have added up to a show that quietly faded from memory when it ended. That is what usually happens to long-running network dramas. They run for as long as they can, they wrap up, and then they drift off into cable reruns, where people watch them while folding laundry and slowly forget about them. That did not happen to Suits. The opposite happened. Suits, 4 years after it ended, somehow became the most watched show on Netflix. Not a hit, not a pleasant surprise. The biggest thing on the entire platform. It broke streaming records. It sat at the top of the Netflix rankings for weeks. It outperformed Wednesday and Stranger Things, 2 shows that were brand new, heavily promoted, and built to dominate the service. A show from 2011, set in a world that no longer existed, starring actors who had mostly moved on, blew past shows that were built in the age of streaming and aimed directly at its audience. It happened because of June 2023. Netflix added the full run of Suits to its library in the United States that month. Within weeks, the show was everywhere. Social media filled up with posts about Harvey Specter's Suits. Clips of Mike's magic memory scenes went viral. People who had never watched USA Network in their lives were discovering Louis Litt and quoting him in group chats. Old fans were rewatching. New fans were binging. The numbers were so big that they set real streaming records that the company publicly reported, and they kept climbing for months. Meghan Markle, by that point 4 years into being a very public former member of the British royal family, was suddenly a cast member again in everyone's minds. For anyone who had watched Suits when it first aired, and who had slowly fallen off somewhere around season 5 or 6 because the repetition had started to feel like too much, this was confusing. The show was a hit a second time, bigger than it had ever been the first time, and the exact things that had made it feel exhausting when it was on weekly were now, somehow, the things that people loved about it. How does a show get tired once and then get rediscovered later specifically because of the patterns that tired it out the first time? The answer, when you sit with it, is one of the more interesting things about how people watch television now. And it ends up being a gentle twist on everything we have said about Suits so far. Because the repetition that was a weakness in the network era turned out to be a strength in the streaming era. Not by accident, not despite the repetition, because of it. Let me walk you through why. When Suits was airing on USA Network between 2011 and 2019, people watched it the way people used to watch all television. One episode at a time, waiting a week between each one, paying close attention, going online to discuss each episode on Reddit and on blogs, treating every twist like a real twist, every fight like a real fight, every name change like a real event. Under that kind of watching, the repetition gets loud. You have 7 days to sit with each beat. You have 7 days to notice that the same kind of beat happened last season. You have 7 days to build up resentment toward a show that keeps promising change and keeps pulling back. Under weekly viewing, Suits was a show that kept testing its audience's patience. And a lot of that audience, over time, either tuned out or kept going, but with reduced excitement. Now imagine a completely different way of watching the same show. You are sitting on your couch in the summer of 2023. You have had a long day, or a long week, or a long year. The world has just been through something enormous, a pandemic, long stretches of being stuck at home, many months of canceled plans and hard conversations. Even for people who were lucky and stayed healthy, the previous few years had been heavy. You turn on Netflix. You want something to put on. You do not want to learn a new world. You do not want to meet new characters. You do not want to have to pay close attention to figure out who is who. You want a handshake. You want familiar faces. You want a glass of wine. Suits, on a streaming service in that moment, was perfect for that job. It was perfect for it in ways that nearly no other show was. The reason it was perfect is almost the entire argument of everything we have covered so far, flipped upside down. Consider what a tired person at the end of a long day actually wants from a show. They want to be able to look away without missing much. They want to be able to come back to it 2 days later without getting lost. They want the main characters to still be the main characters. They want The Office to still be The Office. They want the jokes to be familiar enough that they do not have to concentrate to enjoy them. They want the cases to be just interesting enough to keep the screen busy, but not so dense that they feel like homework. They want to feel like they are visiting a place they already know. Every one of those wants is a perfect description of a show built around repetition. A show that has the same 8 characters in the same building is a show you can fall asleep in front of and pick up again the next night without missing a thing. A show where every case has the same shape is a show that gives you predictable bursts of drama without asking you to work for them. A show where big dramatic crises always get reset is a show that never leaves you in a place that is too emotionally heavy to come back to. A show where the firm's name keeps changing, but nothing else really does, is a show that feels active without being stressful. A show where the magic words "scene" is guaranteed to land once an episode is a show that gives you the feeling of a win on schedule, like a vitamin you take each day. Aaron Korsh himself acknowledged this, in a way that is pretty funny when you look back at it. Talking about the show's appeal once it had exploded on Netflix, he said that some people had told him they believed the show succeeded because you did not actually have to pay attention to it. You could have it on while you were cooking a chicken. That is a real thing, he said. A real quote from the creator of the show, admitting that a big part of the show's appeal to many viewers is that you could have it on in the background while you did something else entirely and still enjoy it. Now, Korsh pushed back gently on that framing. He pointed out that after the first season, the show is actually very serialized. You do have to pay attention. Things carry over from episode to episode. But the point is that he was hearing this from people. The people who were powering the show's Netflix resurgence were, many of them, explicitly watching it as background, as company, as comfort. They were not treating it the way the original audience had treated it, as a weekly event to dissect. They were treating it as a warm corner of the house to sit in whenever they felt tired. And a show that can be used as a warm corner is a very specific kind of show. It has to be consistent. It has to be predictable. It has to be warm. It has to be forgiving of inattention. It has to be mostly pleasant. It has to let you miss a scene or a whole episode without punishing you. It has to give you the feeling of spending time with friends without asking you to do the emotional work of making new ones. Every single one of those traits is a trait that comes from repetition. The thing the original USA Network audience had started to hold against the show was the exact thing that made it perfect for the 2023 Netflix audience. There is a larger story in here that goes beyond Suits itself. In the years after streaming took over, something strange happened to what people called comfort TV. Older shows that had not been huge hits during their original runs started to dominate streaming charts. The Office, Friends, Parks and Recreation, Gilmore Girls, Grey's Anatomy. These shows were not new. They were not prestige. They were not the kinds of things critics wrote 1,000-word essays about in their original time. But they turned into the backbone of how millions of people actually watched television. People would work through them again and again, the way a person wears out a favorite sweater. The shows were long, which meant the hours added up. The shows were light, which meant the rewatches did not hurt. The shows had warm ensembles, which meant that coming back felt like coming home. Suits walked into that world and checked every one of those boxes. More than that, it had 9 seasons and 134 episodes, which in the comfort TV economy is a genuine asset. The more episodes, the longer you can live inside the show. The more familiar you are with the characters by hour 50, the warmer the room feels by hour 90. Long shows are not a problem for comfort viewers. Long shows are the point. And Suits, because it ran so long, and because it repeated so consistently, was almost perfectly shaped to become what it became. There is one more piece of this that is worth sitting with, because it is the piece that really closes the circle on the whole argument. The same year that Suits was blowing up on Netflix, USA Network itself was looking back at its older programming with new eyes. Trade publications reported that the network was openly talking about trying to bring back the Blue Sky formula, the one we described in Section 1. They wanted to make new Monk-style shows, new Psych-style shows, new Burn Notice-style shows, new Suits-style shows. They wanted a second age of Blue Sky programming. The reason they wanted it, very simply, was that they had watched Suits come back to life on a different service and break records doing it, and they wanted some of that magic for themselves. What that tells you is that the industry, looking back, had figured out exactly what we have just walked through. Repetitive, warm, character-driven, low-stakes, easy-to-watch shows turned out to be the most durable product the network ever made. Not because they were brilliant in any one moment, but because they aged into comfort. They became the thing people reached for when they were tired. And no amount of prestige TV, with its darkness and its complexity and its demand for close attention, could replace that slot in a viewer's life. There is one more layer to this, and it is the most personal one. When Suits became a Netflix hit in 2023, a lot of the people discovering it were younger than the show itself. They were in college. They were in their first jobs. They were trying to figure out how to be adults. They watched a show about well-dressed grown-ups in a beautiful office, fighting for things they cared about, winning more often than they lost, with a group of friends around them who they could trust. Even knowing that the show is not realistic, even knowing that lawyers do not actually live like this, there is something about that picture that spoke to people. The comfort of Suits is not just the soft background kind. It is also aspirational. It says, growing up does not have to be grim. Your friends at work can be the family you pick. Your problems can have answers. You can wear a good suit. You can say the right thing at the right moment and make it matter. Even if none of that is quite true in real life, it is a lovely thing to spend an evening inside. So here is the strange and beautiful shape of the whole story. A show was built to the rules of a network that wanted warmth and safety and repetition. It followed those rules, maybe too well. Over 9 seasons, it ran the same engines, the same shapes, the same kinds of winds. Critics and weekly viewers started to notice. The repetition became a joke, first quietly, then openly. And then, years after it ended, when it arrived on a platform where people could watch it not as an event, but as a presence, the very same repetition became its greatest gift. The show did not need to surprise you anymore. The surprise had already worn off. What was left was the warmth. And the warmth, it turned out, was what people had actually been watching for the whole time. Which means the real ending of this story is not that Suits became repetitive and fell apart. It is that Suits became repetitive and, quietly, became something bigger than it set out to be. Not a great show in the way critics mean great. A useful show. A room to sit in. A set of friends to visit. Suits was never supposed to be more than a pleasant distraction. It ended up being a place people lived, quietly, at the end of their days. That is the twist. That is what makes the whole story, in the end, a happier one than it looks like when you are in the middle of it. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.